Hey guys, I'm Kendall from Mechanical Advantage Racing, and I'm excited I get to show you the new Garrett Wastegates. We have the GVW 45 and the GVW 40. I'm going to step you through what these come with, as well as what advantages these have to current applications you may have on your car. So we've got the GVW 45 here. I'm going to open it up. First thing, we have a QR code instantly when you open the box, so you can get all the information on the parts if you don't have any current links or anything for them. And then we've got inside here two separate boxes, if I can get this out. One with the guts, and one with the actual wastegate itself. This thing is packed and ready to be thrown off a UPS truck if it needs to be. We've got the wastegate itself. We've got the mounting V-bands. As well as the various hardware, the weld-on flanges if you're making your own wastegate setups, and all of the various springs it comes with. Today, we're only looking at the GVW 40 and the GVW 45. There is also a GVW 50. I don't have one of those for what we're running on a 4-cylinder. That's just a little too much wastegate for our needs. So again, I'm not using one of those. That said, they're all very similar as far as the architecture. You're just going to be looking at different spring rates and just different body size itself. Some other nice features of the wastegate itself, they have all the ports labeled so you know whether it's an air port or a water port. You don't want to be mixing up water in your air port and air in your water ports. It's going to be a bad day for you and your engine if you do that. With their springs, similar to many other wastegate brands, you're going to have them all color-coded. So this is a purple spring. Here we've got our green spring. And finally, this is our black spring. There are several other springs as well. Those are currently inside of the wastegate. We will get to that in a bit. You also have your flanges. Each V-band flange, you're going to have your inlet and your outlet flange. Those are going to be different. It's going to be pretty self-explanatory. They're both different sizes, so your V-band's only going to fit on one. Your bolts for the V-band flanges are all bagged up, along with your air and your water fittings. In addition to the air and water fittings, you've got a series of crush washers. The bigger ones are for your air ports, and the smaller ones are going to be for the water fittings. And the water fittings for these turbos, they are a -4 AN fitting. So there's not necessarily a simple way to integrate this into most cars unless you are in a dedicated race car application. And by implementing these, you will be able to extend the life of your wastegates, especially in an endurance racing scenario. Your diaphragms can be susceptible to heat degradation over time. So this will help keep that temperature down, and it is very beneficial. If you can't integrate the water fittings into your setup, you will still be able to run the wastegate, but just expect a little shorter life out of your wastegate in general. And the last few things that come in the packaging are all the flanges. So you've got your V-band flange for the inlet, which is going to go on the bottom of the wastegate. If you've already gotten a prefabbed header setup, or in our case for Subarus, the up pipe, you're not going to have to need this flange since your setup's going to already have it. And the neat thing with these wastegates is they also integrate with other wastegate brands such as Tile. In this case, this is the 45, so it will integrate with a Tile 44mm flange. And for the GVW 40, it'll integrate with the Tile 38mm wastegate flange. Likewise, with their outlet, if you're running a dump tube, if you already have something that integrates with a Tile dump tube, it will run the same flange as well. So you don't need to go fabricating these on necessarily. In our case, we didn't even end up using them. And one of the most critical components, don't forget this if you're assembling a race car or putting one of these on your car, is the spring seat. This happens a lot, especially us running a shop. We will have customers come in, put wastegates on, and not have the spring seat. And this is very important because there is an air gap in the bottom of the wastegate. You can see the valve just floating and doing nothing. What this does is it slips in place and leaves a tiny lip up here, which seats into the ridge on the flange itself. And if you will look at this when it sits, you can see an air gap, and once you put the V-band on, it compresses and makes sure you have a tight seal so that none of the exhaust gas coming out of the engine leaks through the wastegate before it needs to, before you try and command this to open. I've opened up the wastegate to show you how they've shipped this as well. So as I mentioned earlier, the GVW 45 came with 3 springs in the box. Now, there are 3 additional springs that come preloaded inside the wastegate, giving you a base pressure of 1 bar or 14.5 psi. And that's going to be the same for the 45 and the 40 as a base pressure. Now, in my application, we want more base pressure, so we're going to be ramping up into the 25 psi range. So we're going to need to add more spring. So for the spring combination we had in here to add up to that 1 bar, they utilize these 3 springs: the brown, the white, and the blue. If you want to change your target pressure, you can find what spring combination you need for that exact pressure on the Garrett website. They have a nice document with different check marks showing you what colors you need to combine. It could be as little as 1 spring to try and hit 3 psi, or upwards of 4 springs to go into the higher realms of pressure. So now that we have our spring rates all set up for the GVW 45, which is destined for one of our street modified shop cars, we are going to set up the GVW 40 for the race car behind me. Now, unlike the GVW 45, on the GVW 40, we're going to have 4 springs that come in the packaging, not installed in the wastegate. We're going to have 2 pre-installed inside the wastegate. Now, why this is we're going to be targeting 14.5 psi of pressure out of the box. That's the base pressure these come with. The smaller wastegate does not need as much spring, as it doesn't have as much surface area for your exhaust gas to press on. So it doesn't need to apply as much force to this face to open it. So now we're going to put the proper springs in so we can hit our target base pressure. In the GVW 40, I'm targeting 25 psi. And what that means, we need to take the cap of the wastegate off and exchange the brown spring that's inside it with the white and the purple springs that were supplied in one of the external boxes. This will hit our target and take us from the 14.5 psi base up to a 25 psi base. Alright, so we have our springs installed for the 25 psi target pressure. And our remaining springs here that we do not need, we will just set those aside in case we want to adjust any of our base pressures down the road. But before we put this on the car, we have a few things we have to do. We need to install the air fittings. You could do this in car. It's much easier to do it before, specifically because you've got 3 air ports on the bottom. This is the silver portion. This goes to the bottom of the diaphragm. All of these air ports lead to the same volume of air on the bottom of that diaphragm. You have 3 ports so that if you need to move the actual single air fitting for the accessibility of your application, you can use any of the 3. And Garrett has supplied you with 3 plugs. You will use 2 on the bottom since you have 3 ports. And on the top, you've got a port directly on the top and 1 on the back side. Now, these aren't necessarily mandatory. Depends how you're doing your boost control. In our application, we will just be running air to the bottom. It's a very basic wastegate control setup, so that's all we're going to need. I will be putting the fittings on the top of the wastegate in case we might change our boost control strategy, but for now it's just to keep debris out of the wastegate itself. Make sure these are tight. If they fall out, you're going to have a bad day and overboost your car. Nobody wants that. On your banjo fitting, you'll use their crush washers, one on top and one on the bottom. On the wastegate, you have 3 air ports on the bottom section, and what I'm referring to as the bottom section is this silver portion that goes all the way around, and the top section is the red cap. You saw the diaphragm earlier, and what that diaphragm does is it divides these 2 volumes of air into this bottom port and the top. If you are to inflate with the top port, you will be pushing this valve this way, which would be the close position, to raise boost. And if you put air to any of these bottom ports, you will be opening the wastegate to bleed boost off. In our scenario, I have plugged these 2 front air ports as it is the most accessible spot to feed air into that bottom diaphragm from the back hole. We have, as you can see, the water fittings, which I have sitting here. I don't have them in the wastegate, as on our race car we do not run the water ports. The car does not run on track long enough to really need that kind of water port or cooling, because it's just a time trials car. So we're only seeing 1, 2, maybe 3 laps back to back. This wastegate simply isn't seeing the type of heat that an endurance race car is going to see, so we don't necessarily need those. That said, it will reduce the life of the wastegate over the long haul, so we may not get as many miles out of this as we would if we plumbed the water. As far as the top goes, I have the plug on the back side, and I have the air vent or feed in some cases just directly on the top. I will not be using this. I will just be letting it directly vent to atmosphere. We shouldn't have any active air bleeding into this chamber. All we're trying to do is, as the exhaust gas pushes the valve up in the chamber, the diaphragm is pushing into the red portion. We need to let that air push out. Otherwise, you can have, if you plug both of these holes, you're not going to have proper boost control when you're plumbing air in here. You'll be pushing a pressurized chamber into another chamber that's ramping pressure, and that is not good. So we do not want any active pressure in this chamber for our boost control method. Fully assembled now, and we are ready to put it on the car. I'm going to hand it off to Mary to show you how to put the wastegate on the car. We will be putting it on what we refer to as the Slumdog Millionaire. This is a hodgepodge of leftover race parts from various builds that we campaign with the shop.
Hey guys, I'm Mary, Mechanical Advantage Racing. As mentioned before, this is Slumdog. We will be installing the Garrett GBW40 wastegate. We have already installed one on the passenger side, as this is a twin turbo application. As mentioned before, do not forget your spring seat or your exhaust gas will just blow right by, and it'll be basically like running an open wastegate all the time, which that is no help to you. All right. Alright, so now we have wastegate all installed here on the driver's side. Now we just need to attach some vacuum lines and get it all finished up.